Hey guys, Michelle Glass here, and welcome back to our Chapter 16, Lecture 16 series. And our topic for this this video, is autonomic nervous system regulation. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start at the very lowest level, because when we think about the autonomic nervous system, we should think about it as being automatic, the regulation of the internal organs, so the things that we're not consciously thinking about. And so at the very lowest level of organization, we will see that the autonomic nervous system involves lots of visceral reflexes. Remember, our term visceral here means guts, and reflexes are those sort of automatic responses. And so we're going to be talking about them more here in just a few minutes. Then we will see that some of our autonomic nervous system is being regulated from the brainstem. So we have dedicated processing centers located in the medulla oblongata and the pons that are going to be, synapsing onto and helping to regulate our visceral reflexes. And then finally, what we don't necessarily think of right away is that the autonomic nervous system can be regulated at the highest level. The highest level is the cerebral cortex. So remember, cerebral cortex is going to be the gray matter, the processing centers of the cerebrum. The thalamus, which remember is our relay center. So of course, sensory information, if it's going to make its way to the cerebral cortex, has to go through the thalamus. And then our limbic system, which remember is more of a physiological structure versus an anatomical structure, collections of neurons and processing centers basically in the cerebrum. That's usually, we think of the limbic system as our emotions and our motivation and our memory. Remember, anything that's happening at the cerebrum is considered our higher center or our conscious level processing. And it's important to keep in mind here then that our automatic control of our organs can be controlled by our cerebrum, by our thoughts, and by our emotions. So we will see that these neurons in the limbic system and the cerebral cortex can synapse onto the processing centers in the brainstem and synapse onto those preganglionic neurons and make changes to our autonomic nervous systems. So you actually know this already. You can think about your favorite food. So just go ahead and think about right now what it smells like and what it looks like and what it tastes like. And pay attention to what's happening in your mouth right now. Maybe your stomach is starting to make a few noises. So just thinking about your favorite food gets your digestive system ready as if that food is right here ready for you to eat, which it's maybe is, but maybe not. You know this too with sexual arousal. So you know that erotic thoughts can trigger sexual arousal. And you also know this with anger. So you know, I could bring up a topic that you're passionate about, and you can start to have increased heart rate and increased respirations and full-on sympathetic, nervous system response when there's not actually a threat right there. It's all just, thoughts and so forth. Okay. Get rid of that. Alrighty. So going back to our lowest level of regulation of the autonomic nervous system, we have the visceral reflexes. So again, visceral is referring to our guts, remember? So this is the control of our smooth muscle and our cardiac muscle and our adipose tissue and our glands. And reflexes, just like we studied in AMP2, are those automatic responses that are happening outside of your conscious awareness. Now, in the case of the autonomic nervous system, we have what are called short visceral reflexes and then long visceral reflexes. So let's look at short first. Okay, so a short visceral reflex is completely bypassing the central nervous system. So this information never makes its way to the brainstem or the spinal cord. So that means it's all being processed in the peripheral nervous system at those ganglia. So whether we're talking about sympathetic chain or terminal and intramural ganglia for the parasympathetic division, the short reflexes are happening processed at the ganglia. And so these are very simple and very localized, meaning maybe controlling one little section of an organ versus this type of reflex is typically not controlling the entire organ, okay? So when we say localized, we mean like, think of a small collection of cells. Okay, all of that is true, except when we're talking about the digestive tract, we will see that this is the primary method of controlling the digestive tract. So your GI tract has sort of like its own nervous system division, if you want to think of that. It's called the enteric nervous system. I'm going to do a video presentation just on the ENS, but we'll see that the ENS is dominated by these short visceral reflexes. But again, we do know that the digestive tract is also innervated by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. So we see there's lots of controls there. And next, let's look at the long reflexes. Long meaning now that information has to make its way all the way to either the brain or the spinal cord. So now we're going to see processing is happening by the central nervous system. So it might happen at the brain and spinal cord level, brain stem and spinal cord level, or it may make its way to, the medulla oblongata and the pons processing centers, or perhaps we see that this information is making its way to your higher centers. Your long visceral reflexes are more widespread. So here this might be like coordination of the entire organ versus just a small portion of the organ, which is what we saw with our short visceral reflexes. When we're talking about our higher order functions, again, you should always consider that this is referring to the cerebral cortex, meaning the cerebrum. The higher order functions are going to process conscious information, but also unconscious information. So we are seeing that the cerebral cortex is involved in regulation of our organs, which is, of course, unconscious regulation happening at the higher order center. So some of that information that's being processed is coming from the unconscious level. And then we'll see that the higher order functions are adjusted over time. So these are not reflexes. They're not those quick automatic responses. Some examples of higher order functions are memory and consciousness, both of which are discussed in detail in your textbook. So if these are topics that you're very interested in, you should take some time to read those sections. I'm not going to go quite as detailed in my discussion, but I am going to go over it just a little bit. Of course, memory is something that's near and dear to all of your hearts, right? Because you are students. And so a big thing that you have to do is learn how to convert a short-term memory into a long-term memory. And really, for us, that means usually practice. There are different types of memory. So we're going to see that we have what are described as fact memory. So this is, like your name and your phone number and your address and your student ID number would be a fact memory. And then we have skill memory. So these are things, like you're physically doing. So real simple skill memories are stored at the brainstem level. So this might be, something as simple as writing or walking or these types of things. More complex skill memories. So if you've trained yourself for an athletic skill, for dancing, any of these types of things, playing a musical instrument, then you're going to see that it's a more complex kind of network of neurons. And so it's going to involve your limbic system and your cerebral cortex and your cerebellum, which, remember, we talked about that last semester as kind of your muscle memory storage. Okay, so we have fact memories and skill memories, and then we have what we can call short-term memories, which are like immediate recall. And then we have what are called long-term memories, which have been converted by the limbic system. So a short-term memory can become a long-term memory through a process called memory consolidation, and that is coordinated by the limbic system. So remember, that's your emotion, your motivation, your memory storage network of neurons. Now, long-term memories can then be divided into either secondary or tertiary. So my little 2 with the degree at the top represents secondary, and my 3 with the degree at the top means tertiary. Your secondary long-term memories can fade with time. So, you know, information that you have studied this year in your AMP1, your AMP2, maybe you stay real strong with it as you use it through your nursing program or your cardiovascular tech program or whatever program you are moving into, but maybe there are bits of information that we covered in this class that you're not using in your day-to-day, professional jobs, and so that information can fade with time. Okay, that makes sense. We know that. Tertiary long-term memories are, let's call them forever memories. That's like your whole lifetime. So pretty much you learn your name and you know your name. You know the feel of your body. Okay, so these would be examples of tertiary long-term memories. Okay, the last little bit of information to look at is consciousness. And again, there's quite a bit of information presented in your text. I'm not going to go over very much of that. It is very interesting. So if that's a topic that you want to investigate further, go for it. Basically, we have 2 states of consciousness. You can either be unconscious or you can be conscious. Consciousness, let's put this here. Consciousness is described as the awareness of and attention to external stimuli. So when you're asleep, you're kind of in this range between unconsciousness and consciousness, right? Because there's some point where you're able to wake up and become conscious. When we talk about consciousness, then there's different ranges to that, right? So you might be nearly asleep or wide awake or super alert and jumpy and high strung. So this would all count in that range of consciousness. Okay.